This is aerial photographs of Mendota, Illinois. It's very important that we know what it looked like back then. So we have the CB&Q yard north there at the top of the screen. There were two yards. There was one on the east side and then one on the north side of the tracks. So on the east side there was the farmers co-op there, and there were a bunch of grain elevator facilities there, and they did have two tracks that went on both sides of the water tower there, and by JD Tower, which was a farm machinery manufacturer back in the day. Okay, so we have the Milwaukee Road up at the top left there, marked MILW, and that followed the CB&Q North Yard out to the viaduct, and then at the viaduct it took a left turn and went north toward Welland. Then we have the Illinois Central line, which went left by the long Quonset hut there that's draping around the curve of Main Street. That track would have went through like where Casey's is at today, and right through the front door of our modern library and where all them new houses were built. That's where the Illinois Central went, and then it followed Route 52 to Amboy. If you're going up to Amboy, the tracks, there's still remnants. You can see signs of the Illinois Central along that route. Okay, back to the diagram here, to the aerial photos captured by Leo Mulock. This is from 1967. All right, we have our CB&Q depot today, our Railroad Museum, Amtrak station, and that is still pretty much looking the same, minus a roof. That was originally built in 1888. Then we have the Railway Express Agency building, which is basically right in the area of where our steam engine is at today, the 4978. Then across the tracks from that was the CB&Q Freight House. Okay, there was a long rectangular building there, and there were three tracks in front of that. Where they parked the local engine today is one of those tracks. Actually, there's still two tracks there, so yeah, two of the three are still there. And then there were two tracks on both sides of the water tower. So right in front and right in the back of it. I remember that growing up in the 70s. Okay, and then we have the Illinois Central Freight House, which is the Mexican restaurant today. Very fine food. And right across from the Illinois Central Freight House, which was built in 1854, they started in 1853, got done in 1854. Right across, kind of catty corner from it, in that open grassy area, was the Illinois Central Passenger House / eating house. That was built basically at the same time as the Freight House. So you're talking 1853, 1854. They were both finished. The foundation stones for both buildings were gotten from Troy Grove, which probably was called Homer back then in the 1850s. They had a rock quarry there. And then, okay, we want to look at this carefully. Because there were three gas stations on the corner there of 5th Street and Main. And there are none today. But as you cross 5th Street or 6th Street, as you're crossing the tracks, okay, you come across the old Watkins Cafe, the white building, Central Agency, insurance agency today. That was originally built. The building was built in the 1870s. Okay. And once again, let me talk a little bit about that grassy area, that open area. Okay, the Illinois Central passenger house was built right in that area closest to the REA building, Railway Express Agency building. Okay, and then the next building south of it, which was attached to the Illinois Central passenger house, was the baggage room, the Illinois Central baggage room and the CB&Q baggage room. That's where the fire started in the CB&Q side, and then it ended up, and this is in 1885, burned down most all the buildings except the REA building, which was closest to 6th Street, where there was also a water tower. So in order, there was the Illinois Central passenger house, the baggage rooms for both railroads, and then there was the, I want to say, trying to remember the Sanborn maps, the telegraph office, and then a baggage or a shed, and then there was the REA building, the very first REA, Railway Express Agency building, which we do have a picture of it from a distance taken in the 1870s. And that was the only building that was saved during the fire. Okay. All right. So as we cross 6th Street, we come upon the crossing of the trails, crossing of the Burlington and the Illinois Central Railroad. Okay. And at that crossing, there was an interlocking tower, which was built in 1904. And before that, there was a flagman's house, which was located just in that little V section there, right south of the 6th Street there. Okay, so there's a lot in this picture here. To the far left was a lumber company, Alexander Lumber. And there was a little spur track that went back in there, and I remember that as a kid, and it crossed 5th Street, and it went behind Black Brothers. So Black Brothers also had rail service, and I remember they were using the little BN SW 1200, green and white, would go back in there and pick up and set out cars. Matter of fact, I can see a boxcar in this picture right above where Black Brothers says. And then that track would cross the street there into the lumber company. Okay, if I want to see if I can finish up on that. Okay, we also have a scrapyard there. Okay, and then we have sand and gravel. So it was a huge scrapyard. I remember it as the Coopersmith's scrapyard, junkyard, and then sand and gravel. I remember that. And anyway, there was tracks in there. You know, they would load gondolas with scrap, steel, metal. And then there was also a switch that went off the Milwaukee Road there at 5th Street. You could see it, and that's where the Q interchanged with the Milwaukee. And at one time, in that little light area where it looks like there's gravel there, there was a huge elevator, the Dole elevator, that was moved there in 1903 or 4 across the tracks, because where it says where Black Brothers is at was actually where the old CB&Q roundhouse was, and Black Brothers was closer to the depot downtown, and then they moved down here to 9th Avenue. But anyway, the Dole elevator was moved across the double track main line over to the Milwaukee Spur in 1903 or 4. I can't remember. I have to read my papers again. But anyway, you can see coming from the interlocking tower there, the Milwaukee veered off to the left, and today the Milwaukee Depot still stands. It's been changing hands through the years, different businesses, and from a bank, credit union to insurance agencies, and now it was just sold and bought again, and so we'll see what it's going to be now. All right, so as we continue our little aerial view here, we take a closer look at the intersection where both railroads crossed. Okay, that's crossing of the trails. That's where Mendota got its name. The Illinois Central came here first. They were here first. An old work train came up in 1853 in the summer, late summer, and the report was, the guy said, I do not see the Burlington, which would have been called the Chicago and Aurora at that time. You know, there was no sign of the Chicago and Aurora at that time. They came just shortly after. So that would have been where the Chicago and Aurora would come in to meet the Central Military Tract Railroad coming from Galesburg. And then eventually, I think in 56, it became the Burlington, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. I could be wrong on a date or two, but I'm close. All right, so as we look at this picture here, we can see a nice view of the yard and how many tracks there were. I mean, this was a big interchange point. The Illinois Central, in its heyday, I mean, if you go back to the early 1900s, there were 39 passenger trains a day that stopped here. The Illinois Central is on the left there, closest to, on the left side of the depot, let's say. And there were 3 tracks there. Okay, they had moved the freight house closer into Main Street, 14 feet in 1904. They were going to move it north into a railroad park, which was there in the early years, but then that became the city parking lot. Okay, so like I say, this is just another view of all of the tracks that once were laid out in Mendota. So it's pretty interesting. And what else can I comment on? The Illinois Central went south. Okay, here is and north, of course, northwest. Okay, here is a nice view of our interlocking tower. Looks to be in the 1950s here. And you'll see the monuments on the left-hand side. The Mendota Monument Company is the only business left on that side of the street, and basically in the same building, I believe so. And they would display their, advertise their stones across the street in that whole area. And then the gas station was on that corner too. So the Milwaukee, the Illinois Central, and the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy crossed right here, and the track to the right of the interlocking tower was the interchange track between the Burlington and the Illinois Central. And I remember that very vividly. So that's your track layout there at that time. Now in this view here, we're looking south, okay? And the main street you see there in the upper left-hand corner, I should say, is 7th Avenue, okay? So if you're at 7th Avenue today or you go by there, you have to realize there was 4 tracks in that whole area. Okay, those 4 tracks diverged into 3 tracks at about 1st Street, Okay, and then those 3 tracks went all the way down to past, where the sewage treatment plant is. So you're past Cherry Street there, or yeah, I think it's Cherry Street. The last street, okay, so the last street there, and you have to take a left, or you go straight to the, water treatment plant, sewage plant. And that used to follow the 3 tracks of the Illinois Central, and just across on the other side of that silo in the picture, that little farm area, was the Milwaukee Road tracks. So, okay, those 3 tracks, what I'm trying to say, is diverged into 2 tracks, and then 1 to the main line, which there was only 1 track going over the creek there, so it had all diverged. Okay. So in this picture, you also see the Milwaukee Road Depot just north of 2nd Street. Okay. And you also notice a bunch of grain bins there between the Illinois Central and the Milwaukee. And that I don't remember when I was a kid. I grew up on 7th Avenue and 2nd Street. I lived right on the corner. 301 7th Avenue was where I lived. And also a guy by the name of Clarence Rapine, his grandfather, who was, I think, the first foreman for the Milwaukee when they first started, right around that area, lived in that house also. 301 7th Avenue. So I have a lot of fond memories of that place. I lived right on the front, I got front seat view of the old Illinois Central, the charter line, the main line. Yeah. All right. I missed those days. I'm glad I lived through those days so I could share with you what it used to look like. So there were 2 tracks in front of the Milwaukee Depot, and then there was a track behind it. You can see there's a boxcar parked behind it. Okay. And then there's a line of boxcars that you can see that go toward the direction of the Burlington track. But the main, if you want to call it, the Milwaukee crossed over what we call West 7th Avenue. There's 2 7th Avenues, There's one on the east side, which is the main paved road there, and then the gravel one. It's now paved, but when I was a kid, it was not. Another interesting thing is there's a sidewalk in front of the Milwaukee Depot. You have to remember when the Milwaukee came to town, there were houses in this area. So in 1903, I should say, they said, hey, we're going to be coming through. We need these houses out of the way, so we're going to buy them. And then coincidentally, a tornado happened at the same time and wiped out a bunch of houses up north of town. So what they did is they measured the foundations of the houses that were existing there, and they moved them up north. And after they put new foundations in for those old houses, they moved all those houses up north and got them out of the way. So then the Milwaukee came to town. So, I mean, it's amazing today that, there's still visible signs of that history. Okay? And I enjoy pointing it out to you because I lived long enough to remember it. And let me also add that there was a lumber company, I can't remember the name of the company, but it was just in between the Milwaukee and the Illinois Central tracks there. And I remember just creosote lumber. I didn't remember any other lumber than that. I don't know if it was Kerr-McGee or I'm not sure. There are some people that may know and can put it in the comments here. I'm sure there's people that know. But anyway, that was my front yard, the Illinois Central Railroad, and the crossbucks that are at the museum right now from the Milwaukee were located at 1st Street, where there were 5 tracks. Okay, there was the 4 tracks that I talked about that merged into 3 at First Street, just beyond the street. Matter of fact, the switch was kind of almost into the street. And then there was the interchange track. Okay, they had to have an interchange track between the Milwaukee and the Illinois Central, so that was the 5th track. So that's where that sign is. It's still flying high in the sky today, but at the Railroad Museum. And it's in great shape after all these years. Okay, so if you get a chance to go down by the Milwaukee Depot, just remember that there was a railroad that lasted there from 1903 to 1980. February 29th, 1980 was the last run of the Milwaukee. So the Milwaukee joined right at 5th Street there on the queue. I should say, okay, the back track there, the interchange track where you see the 3 boxcars, or looks like maybe a hopper in there. And the Dole elevator had been long gone. And that was in that little light shaded area there. And they had moved it across, like I say, the tracks from the queue. All right, so I think there's another thing I want to say is that the railroad cars parked in the IC yard there on the furthest left track of 4 tracks. Okay, those were usually cars that were exchanged between the IC and the Burlington, and that's where they would put them. And there were always cars. As long as I remember, when I was growing up there between 72 and 81, there were train cars there. They were always interchanging, and I was fortunate enough to get a ride on the BN Switcher SW1200 by Charlie Harmon, my friend and I, Butch Haynes, who lived right next door to me. I remember moving to Mendota, gosh, I think it was the summer of 72 or 73, and we met, and we were just like friends instantly, and I was like, my dad didn't tell me that, that we were going to live right next to railroad. They didn't say nothing, and boy, when we got here, I was like, man, how lucky am I to grow up right here, right with Illinois Central as my front yard, and the Milwaukee Road just a stone's throw away, and the Burlington up the street, and early Amtrak started in 71, I think. Okay, so let's go on to some more views here. This is what it looked like looking just south. 5th Street is behind me, and then I'm looking south, and my house would be on the left at 2nd Street. There is a railroad car there parked there on the furthest left track, which was that interchange track. But I think that car is between it. It seems to be between 2nd and 1st Street. Yeah, and I'm standing on the Illinois Central main line, and then the next track to the left would be the siding track. So if there were 2 trains, which I often seen, 2 trains coming into town, usually there was it went both ways, of course. There would be northbound. I'd see the Mars light way in the distance, and ooh, that was always exciting, seeing a Mars light, because you knew you were going to see some train action. Very seldomly did they go straight through. They always had some switching to do with the Milwaukee or the Burlington. And if there was a train on the main here where the fresh ballast is, there would be, let's say, a southbound coming through the Diamonds, and then it would take that track to the left there, which really was not in the best shape. I remember that one being pretty rickety, and it seemed like the outside ones were a little bit better shaped than that siding track. But that siding track went all the way down to the sewage treatment plant, pretty much. It had to, because it had to be able to take a full train. And the one on the right also had to take a full train. Now, the one on the far left ended at First Street, basically, just beyond that crossing. Okay, so you have the, there's a lot I could say here. When you had the Illinois Central come up with coal cars, a string of coal cars, they would back onto the Milwaukee, into the Milwaukee yard, set out all them coal cars. And then the Milwaukee would pick them up and take them north to Janesville, Wisconsin, to the power plants, wherever they were at up there. And then, let's see, I would say that when Milwaukee came back, okay, if they came in front of their depot with all the string of coal empties, okay, they would back those up. They would go well into their yard and then back them up onto this track to the right, okay? So this track to the right, I remember, always filled with coal empties, never coal loads. Okay, so when the Illinois Central came to get them, it would be a southbound train, okay, and they would go all the way down to the switch. Sometimes you would see the caboose. The end of the train would be parked almost just south. They usually didn't block the crossing, so they would just be south of First Street a little bit. They did block the farmer's crossing just a little way, quite a bit, and he was never happy about that, where the silo used to be. And anyway, he would back all the way up onto the far right track and pick up the coal empties and then take them back south to the coal mine in southern Illinois. And then repeat, you know, throughout the week. They'd bring up another coal. Yep, it was constant. So the reason why the Milwaukee built their line was because the Illinois Central was still hauling coal for the Milwaukee after, now let me get this straight. The Illinois Central was almost always hauling coal for the Milwaukee, except when the Milwaukee coal mines were very active and they came in to tap into the coal mines in 1903, 1904, and the Cherry one was set up in about that time, 1905. I could be off 1 year, forgive me, but I'm close. And the Cherry coal mine closed in 28, so a lot of them coal mines started closing in that time period. But in that time period, you know, the Milwaukee had their own coal. They basically said, Illinois Central, thank you for giving us the coal for our railroad for all these years pre-1903. They would usually take the coal up to Freeport, and then from Freeport they could get on, make a connection with the Milwaukee, I think in Rockford or somewhere up there. I don't know about that, but I'm close. But anyway, after the coal mines closed, okay, you had the Illinois Central had to bring coal up from southern Illinois, and so I just explained how the routine was, and that's the way it was set up. So right now in this area, there's a lot of warehouses built here, but this was the land grant. You're looking at evidence here, right, of the land grant railroad. The Illinois Central was the first land grant railroad. The government granted them land, and they had a yard here in Mendota, and they had that 200-foot right-of-way where it was supposed to be absent of trees. If you go to southern, well, a little bit south here to Wapella, you'll see in Wapella and Hayworth that absence of tree, well, especially Wapella, you want to be, that is a good example if you want to see the old Illinois Central, the last remaining remnants of the Illinois Central still active at this time in 2025 with 70-year-old Jeep 10 locomotives. It's quite a sight to see. So lots of history, and I absolutely enjoy it. But this is one of the few pictures that I took. Okay, and this shot here, this is, there you see, okay, I was just talking about it. You remember I was saying the coal empties, okay, on that far, okay, up at the top, you know, be the bottom track on the IC, and then on the other side of the silo, on the bottom of the screen was the Milwaukee yard, okay, and they had 4 tracks down there when it verged from 2 to 4, and you can see the switches right there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. You can see the 3 tracks, and you remember I told you that the 3 tracks, the 4 tracks turned into 3 tracks just south of 1st Street. And then here we look at the 3 tracks. And here we also look at that little farmer's crossing that used to be blocked. And that farmer was very pissed because it would be blocked for a day or 2 sometimes. So he complained a lot. Whether anything was done, I don't know. But anyway, there you see the hoppers. Sometimes they would be all Milwaukee Road hoppers, and sometimes they would be only Central hoppers. So it varied. And they're waiting on that track for a southbound Illinois Central train to come and pick them up. And if we look at the farm there, the silo, and we look at a loading area for cattle. So they actually used to load cattle there onto trains. So keep that in mind. That is very interesting. Let's see if I can say anything else about the Milwaukee tracks here. All right, well, the Milwaukee tracks, okay. Let's see. I see some loaded coal hoppers. Yeah, all right. So the Illinois Central had already been through, and I'm sure that just to the right of those 2 coal hoppers that I see filled up is a whole string of them. Okay, so the Milwaukee would, a lot of times they'd leave their engines idling at night. This is a late, well, this is an afternoon shot. I would say taken about 2 o'clock, 2 or 3 o'clock. I guess it don't matter. But anyway, on the far bottom track, that's where the Milwaukee would let their engines sit overnight. I remember very distinctly because we used to walk down to the tracks and go up inside of them, especially like on a winter night. And just, we were curious. We climbed up in the F units and just got warm because it was always toasty in there, and heard the radio chatter, and you know, they didn't work at night that I remember. Okay, anyway, that, if you go about a full train length of maybe 70, 80 cars, maybe more, then the tracks diverged into one. And then it went off to the southwest to cross over Route 251, which back then was Route 51. And then it would go off to through Peterstown, and then Fitchmore, and then to Ladd. And then there was a Cherry branch that went from Ladd to Cherry. And I have a Milwaukee Road video that you can learn all about the Milwaukee. Just check that one out. Okay, so in this view here, we are looking south from the tower, right down the Illinois Central main, I'll call it. And then to the right diamond is the Milwaukee, and it veered off. There was a switch to go over to the depot. You can see the depot behind the telegraph pole there, the big one. And then you had a set of signals, semaphore signals in the IC yard there. And you had a little shed to the left. You had all these rods here to the left, by the steps there. They were for the interlocking switches and the semaphore signals, believe it or not. So those semaphore signals in the distance, those rods would go all the way down to that point and then make a sharp right turn underneath the tracks, and you'd be able to throw the semaphores from there and all the switches. I remember actually throwing a switch. I was up into the tower when I was a kid, fortunately, and the guy says, "You want to throw a switch?" And I did, and I remember the lever. It was very hard, to pull, but I got it. I pulled it, and I threw that switch that goes from the IC main to the siding there. Yeah, so this is a snowy, cold day. I remember a lot of those kind of days, and it was pretty dreary, but the trains were very active at this point in time. All three railroads very active. Yep. You're looking at, in this view, you're looking at the just right across from the Main Street area on the right in the city parking lot as it is today, and the Illinois Central Freight House in the distance. And then you got telegraph poles there that were strung all the way down. Matter of fact, two of our telegraph poles that are on the site now, just to the left, between the two tracks to the left, were taken from the Illinois Central south of town by the water treatment plant. So they are actual Illinois Central telegraph poles. And you can see the semaphore signals. You can see the loading dock on the freight house there. Okay, and the loading dock was very wide. And remember, keep in mind that that building was moved to the west 14 feet in 1904. Okay, this is a photograph taken by Randy Martin, and I'm showing this to you so you can understand the track layout of what it was like, and to know where the interlocking tower was between 5th and 6th Street. Okay, and this Illinois Central Railroad went straight south to New Orleans. Okay, the Illinois Central Bridge in LaSalle still stands today in 2025 and is still being used by a cement company, Buzzy Unison. So if you want to see a spectacular remnant of the old Illinois Central, just go down to LaSalle. It goes right over the canal and then right over the river there. So 3 tracks were there, and if you come to the museum today, there are 2 tracks, and we have railroad cars sitting on those tracks. Okay, this was the interchange track between the Illinois Central and the Milwaukee. So this is right behind me in this picture that I took is First Street, okay? And at this crossing on the right side of the track, facing east, was the crossbucks that are inside the steam engine, or the fence at where the steam engine is at on the depot, at the depot. Okay, and this was after the line was abandoned and rails were rusty. It's a sad sight. Okay, where do I begin with this one? This image here, this drawing that I did with colored pencil, was gathered from information from Sanborn maps and about 4 or 5 photographs. Okay, so with those photographs I was able to put this together. Okay, on the far left we have the Illinois Central Passenger House. Then we have the little short building right north of it by the chimneys there, which is the baggage rooms for both railroads. Illinois Central on the right side and Q on the left. Then we have our telegraph office, which is right across from the Illinois Central Freight House, just close to the main there. And then we had a shed, and then we had the REA building, the very first Railway Express Agency building. And then we had a water tower, and then across the street a flagman's house. Okay, so in the 1870s, this is basically very, very, very close to what it looked like. And like I say, this was all taken from Sanborn maps and photographs. So that is our earliest view of that. Okay, here we can see that I was not kidding when I say that there was a whole string of coal empties on that far left track. As you can see, this northeasterly view, you can see the Milwaukee Depot there at the left hand corner, and then you can see the creosote lumber on the in between the IC and the Milwaukee. And one of those buildings, they both, I know one of the buildings there is still standing. But anyway, I digress. You got the coal empties that were set out by the Illinois Central, by the Milwaukee Road set them out. And then the Illinois Central southbound train will come and pick them up. And they may have some switching to do with the other cars on the right. So sometimes I remember